In the quiet outskirts of a Massachusetts city stood the imposing Ashford Hospital for Neurological Disorders. Between 1887 and 1895, records show over 800 patients admitted through its heavy oak doors. Fewer than 400 ever returned to their families. Those who did emerged fundamentally altered, hollow-eyed and compliant, their former personalities erased as completely as writing wiped from a slate. The disappearance of patients, particularly children and young adults with behavioral challenges, followed a chilling pattern. Families received official-looking but suspiciously vague reports of successful treatment and relocation, or unexpected complications. Direct contact became increasingly rare, their fates concealed behind imposing stone walls and medical terminology designed to discourage questions. What makes this story truly disturbing isn't merely the vanishing of hundreds of vulnerable patients, but the deliberate, methodical nature of the horrors inflicted upon them. This wasn't random cruelty or negligence. It was systematic experimentation, disguised as medical advancement, conducted with clinical precision by individuals who believed they were pioneering a new frontier of neurological science, regardless of human cost. The documents you're about to see were sealed for over a century, their contents deemed too disturbing for public knowledge. They reveal a medical facility that operated not as a place of healing, but as a laboratory where living human beings, primarily society's most vulnerable members, were subjected to unspeakable procedures in the name of scientific progress. Before we continue with this harrowing chapter of American medical history, I should warn you, this channel isn't for everyone. Only the most determined truth seekers who can face the darkest corners of our past should continue watching. If you're brave enough to hear what really happened behind those respectable Victorian facades, hit that subscribe button now and let us know in the comments what state you're watching from. Are you prepared to uncover what powerful institutions have tried to erase from our collective memory? Let's find out together. The year was 1887, the height of America's Gilded Age, a period of unprecedented scientific advancement and industrial growth that created perfect conditions for abuse, particularly in neurology, where the line between legitimate medicine and pseudoscientific experimentation remained dangerously blurred. Massachusetts had established itself as the intellectual center of American medicine, producing physicians whose authority went unquestioned by a society that viewed doctors with almost religious reverence. The Ashford Hospital rose on 10 acres of carefully landscaped grounds just outside a thriving Massachusetts city, close enough to access wealthy patients, yet far enough from urban centers to ensure privacy. 3 stories of red brick and granite towered above carefully manicured gardens, with 2 additional subterranean levels that appeared on no official blueprints. The building's Victorian Gothic architecture projected authority and permanence, its imposing facade designed specifically to inspire awe and discourage scrutiny. Unlike chronically underfunded public asylums, where patients often languished in squalid conditions, Ashford presented itself as an exclusive, cutting-edge institution. The main entrance opened into a marble-floored reception hall adorned with mahogany paneling and medical illustrations rendered in gilded frames. Visitors' areas featured plush furnishings, electric lighting, still a novelty in the 1880s, and the latest medical equipment imported from Europe, all carefully staged to project an image of scientific advancement and exceptional care. What distinguished Ashford from other institutions was its unusual financial structure. While most hospitals operated under state oversight or religious management, Ashford functioned as a private enterprise, funded entirely by an anonymous benefactor. This arrangement allowed the hospital to operate without oversight. No board of governors, no church authorities, no state inspectors monitoring its activities or questioning its methods. Dr. Alistair Ashford, the facility's founder and director, claimed this independence was essential for innovation. True medical advancement requires freedom from constraints of conventional thinking and bureaucratic interference. This seemingly progressive stance appealed to families desperate for help with conditions that mainstream medicine had failed to address. The hospital specialized in complex neurological disorders and difficult cases, conveniently broad categories encompassing everything from epilepsy and paralysis to behavioral conditions like excessive emotionality, feminine hysteria, and moral deficiency. This last category proved particularly versatile, allowing admission of patients whose only real disorder was behavior that families found troublesome. Unmarried women who rejected suitors, children who questioned authority, or individuals who failed to conform to Victorian social norms. The facility's architecture facilitated secrecy at every level. Public areas impressed visitors with modern equipment and clinical cleanliness, while the true treatment facilities remained hidden behind locked doors marked staff only or concealed behind false walls and hidden passages. The basement levels, where the most egregious experiments took place, connected to a network of underground tunnels leading to outbuildings where bodies and evidence could be discreetly removed when necessary. Security measures far exceeded those of legitimate hospitals. Guards patrolled day and night, ostensibly to protect vulnerable patients from potential harm. Windows throughout the building were fitted with unobtrusive but effective iron bars. Patient rooms could be locked from the outside, and restraint equipment was built into bed frames and examination tables as standard features. Perhaps most telling was the hospital's unusual staffing arrangement. Rather than hiring from the local population, Dr. Ashford recruited personnel exclusively from distant locations, preferring immigrants with limited English and few social connections in America. Staff lived in dormitories on hospital grounds with restricted movement outside the facility, effectively isolating them from the surrounding community and ensuring their silence. The hospital maintained dual record systems, sanitized versions for families and potential investigators, and detailed research journals documenting horrific experiments in clinical detail. The official medical records describe conventional treatments and plausible outcomes, while the true records contained meticulous documentation of surgical procedures, brain tissue samples, and behavioral modifications, complete with photographs and detailed measurements. By 1890, Ashford Hospital had established an international reputation for managing difficult cases. Families from as far as Chicago, New Orleans, and London sent troublesome relatives to Massachusetts, paying exorbitant fees for mysterious but effective treatments. Few questioned what these procedures entailed, and fewer still investigated what happened to patients who never returned. The atrocities at Ashford Hospital required the collaboration of three key individuals, each bringing distinct and disturbing talents to their enterprise. A triumvirate of evil whose combined skills created a perfect machine for systematic abuse hidden behind a veneer of medical respectability. Dr. Alistair Ashford presented himself as the embodiment of Victorian medical authority. Tall and imposing, with piercing blue eyes and prematurely silver hair that lent him an air of distinguished wisdom beyond his 45 years. His immaculate appearance, tailored suits imported from London, gold watch chain across his waistcoat, and the small red ribbon of a fictional European medical society on his lapel, created an impression of unquestionable expertise and success that few thought to challenge. He spoke with the refined accent of Britain's educated elite, though investigators would later discover he had spent only 2 years at Edinburgh Medical School before dismissal for research methods incompatible with ethical standards, a detail carefully omitted from his American credentials, replaced with fabricated degrees from prestigious European universities. Public records eventually revealed his birth name was not even Ashford, but Alan Simmons, the son of a Manchester textile worker who had reinvented himself completely after being forced to flee England following a scandal involving unauthorized experiments on asylum patients. What made Dr. Ashford truly dangerous was his combination of genuine brilliance and complete moral detachment. His understanding of neuroanatomy was indeed advanced for the era, having conducted hundreds of brain dissections and published several legitimate papers on cerebral structure in obscure European medical journals. But this knowledge served a dark purpose, identifying precisely which regions of the living brain could be manipulated to produce specific behavioral changes. In rare public lectures, Dr. Ashford spoke of the brain as a mechanical system that could be adjusted and optimized through direct intervention. He described personality traits as merely functional errors that could be corrected through proper techniques. Most chilling was his repeated reference to necessary sacrifices for scientific advancement. His personal journals revealed a man utterly devoid of empathy, viewing suffering with clinical curiosity rather than compassion. Subject 117 exhibited extraordinary vocal responses during cerebellar stimulation. He wrote of a 12-year-old epileptic boy. The procedure continued for 47 minutes until subjects ceased responding to stimuli, tissue samples preserved for further study. Another entry described a series of experiments on identical twin girls, aged 8, where different regions of each child's brain were systematically damaged to compare the effects, documented with the dispassionate precision of someone cataloging machinery rather than destroying young lives. Matron Thorne served as head nurse and administrator, second in command and the operational force behind the hospital's daily functioning. Her background as a Civil War military nurse had hardened her to suffering while providing valuable experience in maintaining institutional discipline and secrecy. Tall and gaunt with perpetually starched uniform and tightly pulled back gray hair, her appearance embodied her unyielding personality. A woman who had systematically eliminated any trace of compassion or emotional vulnerability from her character. While Dr. Ashford conceived the experiments, Matron Thorne implemented the systems making them possible on an institutional scale. She developed the patient classification system, categorizing new arrivals based on their suitability for specific experimentation. Category A patients, those from wealthy, influential families who might investigate disappearances, received milder treatments and were eventually returned to their families with altered personalities, but physically intact. Category B patients, those with fewer connections or from more distant locations, became subjects for more invasive experiments, often resulting in permanent institutionalization or death. Category C patients, indigents, orphans, or those whose families had explicitly abandoned them, were considered expendable research material and subjected to the most extreme procedures with no expectation of survival. Thorne's organizational skills ensured the hospital's public facade remained impeccable, while its true activities remained hidden. She orchestrated the elaborate deception that greeted visitors, selecting which patients would be presented to family members, coaching staff on appropriate responses to questions, and ensuring that no unauthorized person ever witnessed the true nature of the hospital's treatments. Her personal log revealed pride and efficient cruelty. Developed improved restraint technique for cerebral access procedures. Previous method allowed excessive movement during critical moments. New approach reduces subject mobility by 93% and improves procedure accuracy. Another entry detailed her method for selecting compliant staff. Identify candidates with history of institutional upbringing. Foster children and orphanage graduates show heightened response to authority and reduced emotional attachment to patients. While Dr. Ashford embodied evil through intellectual detachment, Matron Thorne represented evil through absolute obedience and organizational efficiency. She never questioned orders, never exhibited moral qualms about her actions, and never deviated from protocols once established. Former staff recalled her favorite phrase, delivered in response to any expression of concern about patient suffering: "The procedure is the priority. Patient comfort is not a consideration." Completing this triumvirate was Nurse Croft, whose transformation from idealistic healer to complicit participant provides the most disturbing psychological study of the three. Unlike his superiors, Croft began as a genuinely idealistic young professional. At 28, with formal training from a respected Boston nursing college, he initially believed he was participating in legitimate neurological treatment for vulnerable patients who desperately needed help. Handsome and soft-spoken with earnest brown eyes and gentle hands, Croft represented good intentions corrupted through gradual compromise and manipulation. Dr. Ashford and Matron Thorne recognized his potential usefulness immediately. His legitimate credentials, natural empathy, and trustworthy demeanor made him the perfect public face for family interactions and community relations. They engineered his corruption methodically, beginning with minor deceptions before gradually involving him in increasingly disturbing activities. His initial assignment to post-operative care allowed him to witness the results of the procedures without participating directly. Each small compromise made the next one easier to accept, each rationalization paving the way for more extreme moral violations. Croft's diaries document this moral disintegration with painful clarity. Early entries expressed concern about vacant-eyed patients and questionable practices. Margaret continues to stare blankly after her procedure. Dr. Ashford assures me this is temporary and necessary for her improvement, but something feels wrong about her vacant expression. Middle period entries show growing complicity with increasing use of clinical language to distance himself from the humanity of his patients. Assisted with frontal access procedure on patient 208 today, held the retractors while Dr. A made the excisions. Patient's screams were difficult at first, but the scientific importance helps me focus beyond the momentary discomfort. By 1890, his writings reveal complete integration into the hospital's operations, though occasional passages suggest persistent inner conflict. Sometimes I remember who I was before coming here, and I don't recognize what I've become. But the work is too important to abandon now. We're making discoveries no one else dares to pursue. What made Croft valuable to the Ashford operation was his ability to present a compassionate face to the outside world. While Dr. Ashford intimidated with authority and Matron Thorne chilled with severity, Nurse Croft could comfort a concerned mother with seemingly genuine empathy and reassurance. His boyish sincerity and apparent devotion to patient welfare diffused suspicions that might otherwise have arisen. This carefully constructed triumvirate created a perfect system for implementing and concealing horrors under the guise of legitimate medicine. Dr. Ashford provided intellectual justification and research direction, maintaining the scientific veneer that legitimized their activities. Matron Thorne ensured systematic implementation and documentation, creating the operational infrastructure that processed hundreds of victims efficiently. Nurse Croft managed external perceptions and gradually indoctrinated new staff, maintaining the protective facade that kept outside scrutiny at bay. Most disturbing, their private writings suggest they viewed themselves not as villains, but as misunderstood pioneers, whose methods would eventually be vindicated by history. Future generations will understand the necessity of our methods, Dr. Ashford wrote to a European colleague. What appears as cruelty to the unenlightened is merely the necessary cost of advancement. By 1892, these three individuals had perfected their system for transforming vulnerable patients into experimental subjects. The true horror wasn't just the procedures themselves, but the methodical, institutionalized nature of the abuse. An entire facility designed specifically to facilitate experimentation under the protection of medical authority. The Macabre Mystery of the Ashford Hospital, A Sinister Tale, 1887, Massachusetts. Constructed facade of the Ashford Hospital began to crumble with the arrival of Dr. Jonathan Wells in autumn 1892. A promising young physician from Johns Hopkins Medical School, Wells had been personally recruited by Dr. Ashford after presenting an innovative paper on neurological diagnostics. Unlike the hospital's typical employees, Wells came from a respected medical background with extensive professional connections. Precisely the type of staff member the Ashford triumvirate typically avoided. Dr. Ashford made this rare exception because of Wells' specialized knowledge of emerging electrical diagnostic techniques. As Matron Thorne later wrote, "The Wells appointment was our undoing. We became victims of our own ambition, reaching for advanced methodology without properly assessing the moral flexibility of its practitioner." From his first days at Ashford, Wells noticed troubling inconsistencies. The stark contrast between immaculate public spaces and restricted treatment areas, the evasive answers about patient outcomes, and the strange behavior of long-term staff, their averted gazes when certain procedures were mentioned, and their obvious fear of Matron Thorne, all triggered his professional suspicion. "There's something fundamentally wrong with this institution," Wells wrote after just 2 weeks. "The patients in public wards receive standard care, but there's an entire subset I'm not permitted to examine. When I inquire about specific treatment protocols, I'm told they're proprietary methods that will be revealed when appropriate." What legitimate medical facility operates with such secrecy? His first concrete evidence came through supply requisitions. The volumes of anesthetic, antiseptic solution, and specialized surgical instruments far exceeded what the official patient census would require. Most disturbing was the regular ordering of cranial drilling equipment and brain tissue preservation chemicals in quantities suggesting routine rather than occasional use. Wells began systematically documenting these discrepancies while cultivating a persona of enthusiastic cooperation to gain the trust of Dr. Ashford and Matron Thorne. The breakthrough came late one December night when he observed orderlies transporting a sedated patient toward one of the restricted basement entrances. What caught his attention was the patient's file classification. Category C7, a designation he had never encountered in the official records. Following at a discreet distance, Wells accessed the basement through a service corridor and discovered a nightmare. The basement contains a fully equipped surgical theater, unlike anything in the approved medical areas, he wrote hours later, his handwriting unsteady. The equipment is designed specifically for cranial procedures, with specialized restraints to immobilize the patient's head while leaving them conscious. Most disturbing are the systematic records, detailed documentation of experimental brain surgeries, complete with before and after assessments of personality changes and behavioral compliance. Over the next 3 weeks, Wells conducted careful investigations during night shifts. In a locked storage room, he found hundreds of preserved brain specimens, each labeled with patient names and outcome assessments. Another room contained photographic documentation of procedures so gruesome that Wells was physically ill upon viewing them. Images of exposed brain tissue being systematically manipulated, with clinical annotations about patient responses. Most damning was Dr. Ashford's private research journal, a meticulous record of experimental procedures describing the deliberate damage of specific brain regions to produce desired behavioral changes, eliminating inappropriate assertiveness in women, reducing excessive emotional responses, and experiments on children designed to create optimal compliance and reduced intellectual curiosity. They are not treating these patients, Wells wrote. They are systematically destroying specific aspects of their humanity through targeted brain damage, then documenting the results as if conducting legitimate research. This isn't medicine, it's methodical mutilation disguised as treatment. Perhaps most chilling was evidence that many prominent physicians were receiving research data from these experiments, apparently unaware of the horrific methods used to obtain it, creating a disturbing pipeline where knowledge gained through torture entered mainstream medical practice. Wells' opportunity to expose the operation came in January 1893, when Dr. Ashford and Nurse Croft attended a medical conference in New York. With the hospital under Matron Thorne's sole supervision and security reduced, Wells enacted a plan that would finally reveal the horrors of Ashford Hospital to the world. What Dr. Wells documented revealed a facility designed from its foundation, not for treatment, but for systematic human experimentation. The hidden areas occupying nearly half the institution's total space represented one of the most sophisticated operations for human experimentation ever discovered on American soil. The restricted basement level contained 3 distinct areas. The first was a surgical suite, a space combining elements of traditional operating theaters with specialized equipment for cranial procedures. The central operating table featured reinforced restraints and specialized brackets to hold the head in precise positions. A complex lighting system allowed for detailed work on specific brain regions, while floor drainage systems could handle volumes of fluid far beyond what normal surgery would produce. Most disturbing were the observation areas surrounding the central space, tiered seating where staff could watch procedures being performed, with notebook stands for documenting results. The surgical suite is designed not merely for treatment, but for spectacle, Wells wrote. Procedures are performed as demonstrations, with Dr. Ashford narrating each step, describing the expected personality changes that will result. It is a classroom for teaching inhumanity. The second area, which Wells called the processing ward, contained 20 patient rooms arranged around a central monitoring station. Unlike the comfortable accommodations shown to visitors, these rooms resembled prison cells, bare except for restraint-equipped beds, with observation windows allowing continuous monitoring. The walls were soundproofed, doors locked from outside, and each room contained hidden recording equipment to document patient responses during what Dr. Ashford called the transition phase following surgery. Here, patients were held during the critical period after brain surgery, when their personalities were literally being reformed by the damage inflicted on their neural tissue. Staff notes documented the progression from initial confusion and distress to the eventual emergence of new behavioral patterns, the successful erasure of undesired traits and consolidation of compliant, simplified personalities. Patient 342 continues to ask for her children during conscious periods, read one monitoring report. Recommend additional procedures targeting memory centers. Family specifically requested complete elimination of maternal attachment as condition of continued payment. The third and perhaps most horrifying section was the specimen laboratory, a space dedicated to preserving and studying brain tissue from unsuccessful experimental subjects. This clinically cold room contained hundreds of preservation containers holding full or partial human brains, each meticulously labeled with patient information, procedure details, and failure analysis notes. Adjacent to this macabre collection was a documentation center where results were recorded for distribution to medical contacts throughout the country and Europe. High-quality cameras allowed for detailed images of brain structures, while a small printing press produced the monographs and research papers that maintained Dr. Ashford's scientific reputation. Beyond these main areas lay specialized facilities, chemical laboratories, testing rooms for evaluating patient responses, and most ominously, a crematorium for disposing of experimental material no longer useful for research. This last facility, hidden in a sub-basement, explained how hundreds of patients could disappear without creating suspicious burial records. Architectural plans recovered during the investigation revealed that these hidden facilities had been part of the hospital's design from its inception, not afterthoughts, but central to its intended purpose. The public areas, with their impressive facades, were merely elaborate camouflage for the true operation, taking place behind locked doors and false walls. The documents recovered by Dr. Wells revealed the full horror of the cerebral repatterning program, a systematic approach to altering human personality through deliberate, targeted damage to specific brain regions. Far from the advanced European techniques described in hospital brochures, these procedures represented a fundamental violation of medical ethics and human dignity. Dr. Ashford's research journals provided a chilling record of over 300 distinct protocols for modifying different aspects of human behavior through surgical intervention. Each protocol targeted specific brain regions associated with particular personality traits with the explicit goal of eliminating problematic characteristics and creating more manageable individuals. Protocol 17, B, reduction of female assertiveness, was among the most frequently performed procedures, typically conducted on women who had challenged male authority or sought independence. The surgical approach involved precise damage to regions of the prefrontal cortex associated with decision-making and self-assertion, resulting in patients who became passive, easily directed, and incapable of independent thought. Subject shows marked decrease in oppositional behavior, read one post-operative assessment, previously rejected all suitors and expressed desire for independent living, now accepts all suggestions without resistance and shows appropriate deference to male authority figures. Family reports complete satisfaction with outcome. Even more disturbing was Protocol 23A, elimination of maternal attachment, designed for women who had children outside of marriage or resisted having their children removed from their care. This protocol targeted brain regions associated with emotional bonding and memory, effectively erasing the emotional connection between mother and child. Subject no longer recognizes photographs of infant or responds to infant's cries, noted one clinical assessment. When presented with documented evidence of having given birth 6 weeks prior, subject exhibits confusion followed by indifference. Family reports subject is now prepared for placement in suitable marriage arrangement without complications from previous indiscretion. Children were not spared. Protocol 8C, cognitive compliance enhancement, was developed for children described as excessively questioning, inappropriately intelligent, or resistant to authority. The procedure deliberately damaged areas associated with curiosity and critical thinking, creating children who were obedient, unquestioning, and significantly reduced in intellectual capacity. What made these procedures particularly horrific was that they were conducted while patients remained partially conscious. Dr. Ashford's methods required this awareness, as he needed to observe responses to stimulation of different brain regions to ensure he was targeting the correct areas. Patients were immobilized and prevented from moving or speaking, but not from feeling pain or being aware of what was happening to them. Subject awareness is essential to proper localization, Dr. Ashford wrote. While this necessarily entails some discomfort for the patient, this temporary distress is insignificant compared to the long-term benefit of successful cerebral modification. The sounds produced by subjects during localization provide valuable diagnostic information that cannot be obtained from an unconscious patient. Most disturbing were the experiments conducted on Category C patients, those with no family connections or whose families had explicitly abandoned them. These individuals became subjects for the most invasive procedures, often involving the systematic removal of brain tissue to map functions, until the patient eventually died from cumulative damage. Subject 117 provides our most complete cerebral map to date. Read 1 research summary. Through sequential tissue excision over a 14-month period, we have documented the precise functions of 17 distinct brain regions before subject reached termination point. The successful results of these experiments were returned to families with carefully crafted medical histories, concealing the true nature of their conditions. Those deemed unsuccessful were reclassified as Category C and used for more invasive procedures until they no longer served any research purpose. This wasn't random cruelty or the work of conventional madmen. The recovered documents revealed a systematic research program conducted with scientific precision and meticulous documentation. Dr. Ashford and his associates viewed themselves as pioneers, pushing beyond the constraints of medical ethics to develop techniques they believed would revolutionize the management of human behavior. Future generations will recognize that we stood at the frontier of a new medical paradigm, Dr. Ashford wrote to a European colleague. Just as surgeons were once condemned for violating the sanctity of the human body, only to be later celebrated for saving countless lives, we will ultimately be vindicated when our methods are refined and accepted into mainstream practice. What made the Ashford Hospital operation particularly insidious was its connection to mainstream medicine. Through sanitized publications and private correspondence, Dr. Ashford distributed knowledge gained through his experiments while concealing their origins. Legitimate medical researchers unwittingly incorporated findings obtained through torture into their own work, creating a corrupted stream of knowledge that flowed into standard neurological practice. By early 1893, the Ashford Hospital had processed more than 800 patients through various experimental protocols. Fewer than half had survived to be returned to their families. The rest had either died during procedures or been terminated when they no longer served any research purpose, their bodies disposed of in the crematorium or preserved as specimens. With Dr. Ashford and Nurse Croft away at a medical conference, Dr. Wells seized his opportunity. After weeks gathering evidence, copying records, photographing hidden facilities, and collecting samples of research journals, he carefully packaged his findings and sent them through a trusted colleague to the Massachusetts State Medical Board in the governor's office. I have documented evidence of systematic human experimentation being conducted at Ashford Hospital, Wells wrote. Over 400 patients have been subjected to unauthorized brain surgeries resulting in personality alteration or death. The facility must be investigated immediately. Wells planned to maintain his cover until authorities arrived, but Matron Thorne's suspicions disrupted his careful planning. Summoned to her office, he faced her increasingly dangerous demeanor as she questioned his presence in restricted areas after hours. Though he maintained his story of dedicated research, her calculating gaze made it clear she remained unconvinced. Dr. Ashford values your contributions, she told him with chilling precision, but he has expressed concern about your excessive curiosity. Some areas of our work require absolute discretion. I'm sure you understand that medical advancement sometimes requires unconventional approaches. As Wells left her office, he noticed 2 orderlies following him, the same men who typically transported patients to the basement facilities. His position had become precarious. That night, an unexpected ally emerged. Sarah Winters, a young nurse who had worked at Ashford for 6 months, approached him with visible fear, but determined resolve. "I've seen you watching," she whispered. "I've seen you documenting what happens here. You're planning something, aren't you? To stop them?" Sarah revealed she had initially accepted the hospital's practices out of desperate need for employment, but had grown horrified by what she witnessed. "Last week, they took a 12-year-old girl to the basement," she confided. "She had been admitted for excessive intellectual interests. When she returned, she couldn't remember how to read. She just sat staring at her books, confused, like she'd never seen written words before." Together, they formulated a plan to rescue the most vulnerable patients while waiting for authorities to act. Sarah had access to the transfer schedule and knew 3 children were slated for intensive treatment the following day. They began their rescue just after midnight, using keys Sarah had duplicated to access the processing ward and evacuate the scheduled patients. As they moved the 3rd child, an alarm sounded. Matron Thorne had instituted additional security measures, including silent pressure plates in corridors leading to restricted areas. With orderlies converging on their location, Wells made a decision that would save the evidence but place himself in danger. "Take the children and go," he instructed Sarah. "Get them to safety and make sure my documentation reaches the authorities. I'll create a diversion." Wells deliberately set fire to the documentation room, knowing the threat to Dr. Ashford's research would draw all available staff. In the confusion, Sarah escaped with the children, but Wells was captured by Matron Thorne. "You could have been part of something revolutionary," she told Wells as he was strapped to the same operating table where hundreds of victims had been mutilated. "Instead, you'll simply become another valuable data point. Dr. Ashford will be disappointed to miss your procedure, but I've assisted with enough to conduct it myself." What saved Wells was the timely arrival of state authorities. Led by the state medical board and accompanied by armed police, the inspection team arrived just as Matron Thorne was preparing to begin her gruesome work. The raid revealed the full extent of the operation. 27 patients were found in various stages of treatment, many with partially healed surgical wounds to their skulls. Most disturbing was the specimen collection: 173 preserved human brains, each meticulously labeled with the patient's name, procedure details, and research outcomes. Dr. Ashford and Nurse Croft were arrested at the medical conference in New York, where they had been presenting a paper titled "Personality Modification Through Targeted Neurological Intervention" to colleagues who had no idea of the true nature of their research. The exposure of the Ashford Hospital's atrocities sent shockwaves through the medical community. Newspapers across the country carried headlines about "the House of Horrors in Massachusetts" and "medical science gone mad," though the most graphic details were omitted. Initial court hearings were closed to the public, with testimony sealed to prevent unnecessary public distress and potential damage to medical institutions not involved. Dr. Jonathan Wells became the primary witness for the prosecution. His meticulous documentation provided overwhelming evidence of systematic crimes spanning years. "What occurred at Ashford Hospital was not medicine in any recognizable form," he testified. "It was methodical torture conducted under the pretense of scientific advancement, with full awareness of the suffering inflicted." Legal proceedings revealed the extensive network that had enabled the Ashford operation. Local officials had been bribed to overlook irregularities. Certain physicians had received substantial referral fees. Most disturbing were families who knowingly committed relatives specifically for personality modification, paying premium rates for the elimination of traits they found troublesome. Dr. Alistair Ashford remained defiant throughout his trial, maintaining that his work represented necessary scientific advancement. "Every medical pioneer faces persecution from those who cannot comprehend the necessity of their methods," he declared. "What you call crimes, future generations will recognize as the foundations of a new understanding of human consciousness." The court was unmoved. Dr. Ashford was convicted on multiple counts of murder, criminal medical malpractice, and fraud, receiving life imprisonment. Matron Agnes Thorne received a similar sentence, while Nurse Alistair Croft, who provided extensive testimony against his former colleagues, was sentenced to 20 years. For victims and their families, justice was complicated by shame, stigma, and irreversible harm. Many families of successfully treated patients now face the horrifying truth: their relatives hadn't been cured but deliberately damaged. Some refused to acknowledge what had happened, preferring to maintain the fiction that their now docile relatives had received legitimate treatment rather than confronting their own complicity. The survivors presented a heartbreaking challenge to the medical community. Many had suffered irreversible brain damage, leaving them permanently altered. Simplified personalities, missing memories, lost cognitive abilities that could never be restored. Perhaps most tragic were the children who had undergone cognitive compliance enhancement. Once bright, curious young minds had been deliberately damaged to create obedient, unquestioning individuals with reduced intellectual capacity. Medical experts concluded the damage was permanent. the children would never recover their full potential. The broader medical community faced a reckoning with the uncomfortable truth that knowledge derived from these atrocities had already entered mainstream practice. Dozens of published papers were withdrawn from medical journals. Several prominent neurologists faced professional censure for incorporating research data they should have recognized as ethically suspect. The scandal prompted renewed discussion about medical ethics and oversight. The Massachusetts State Medical Board implemented stricter licensing requirements and mandatory inspections. Several states passed legislation requiring regular independent evaluation of medical institutions, particularly those dealing with vulnerable populations. Yet much of the Ashford Hospital story was deliberately suppressed. Court records were sealed, graphic photographs and detailed case studies locked away, accessible only to authorized researchers. The full extent of the atrocities and the identities of many victims remained hidden, ostensibly to protect privacy, but effectively shielding the medical establishment from the full reckoning such horrors demanded. The physical facility was eventually demolished, the land remaining vacant for decades. Local residents reported avoiding the area even years later, claiming an oppressive atmosphere lingered over the former hospital grounds. Today, the Ashford Hospital case remains one of the darkest chapters in American medical history. A cautionary tale about unchecked authority, the vulnerability of marginalized populations, and how easily the pursuit of knowledge can become corrupted when divorced from ethical constraints and basic human compassion. If this dark chapter of history has affected you as deeply as it has us, please take a moment to share this video and subscribe to our channel. Only by confronting these buried truths can we hope to prevent their recurrence. Join us next week as we uncover another forgotten nightmare from America's shadowed past.